Every 3 seconds, someone died. For 300 days straight. It is a rhythm of death, so relentless, so metronomic, that the human mind struggles to comprehend it. Tick. A life extinguished. Tick. Another. Gone. Tick. Another. For 10 months, the gears of an industrial killing machine turned without pause, grinding flesh and bone into the mud of northeastern France. This was not a battle in the traditional sense. It was an extermination. It was Verdun. At 7:15 on the morning of February 21st, 1916, the world was torn apart. Along a front just 8 miles long, over 1,200 German artillery guns opened fire simultaneously. It was a storm of steel and fire, unlike anything the world had ever seen. 1 million shells fell in the first few hours, a bombardment so intense that it could be heard 100 miles away. The earth did not just shake, it was erased. Forests of ancient trees were vaporized in an instant, turned into a splintered, smoking wasteland. The ground itself, a mixture of soil, rock, and the bodies of men, was churned over and over again, pulverized into a fine, gray dust. This was the beginning of Operation Gericht, or Operation Judgment. And for the French soldiers huddled in their trenches, it was the beginning of hell. To understand the horror of Verdun, you must first understand the cynical, brutal logic behind it. The plan was conceived by the German Chief of Staff, General Erich von Falkenhayn. Falkenhayn was a cold, calculating strategist, a man who saw the war not as a struggle for territory, but as a grim equation of blood and resources. He knew that France, a nation that had already suffered immense losses, could not afford to lose the city of Verdun. It was a place of immense symbolic importance, a fortress city that had stood as a bulwark against German aggression for centuries. The French would defend it to the last man, and that was exactly what Falkenhayn wanted. His goal was not to capture Verdun. The city itself was of little strategic value. His goal was to turn Verdun into an anvil, and to use the hammer of German artillery to smash the French army against it. He wrote in a letter to the Kaiser that his plan was to bleed France white. It was a trap, a battle designed not for a decisive victory, but for mass slaughter. He would force the French to pour their men into the meat grinder of Verdun, and he would grind them into dust. It was a strategy of pure, unadulterated attrition, a war of numbers where human lives were the only currency that mattered. Falkenhayn predicted that the French, for reasons of national pride and strategic necessity, would throw division after division into the defense of Verdun, and that German artillery would destroy them faster than they could be replaced. It was a cold, mathematical approach to warfare, one that reduced human beings to mere statistics in a ledger of death. The Germans called the battlefield the Knochenmühle, the bone mill. It was a name born of a terrible literal truth. The shelling was so constant, so relentless, that the landscape was transformed into something alien, a moonscape of overlapping craters. There were no trenches left, not in the traditional sense. The neat lines of fortifications that had characterized the early years of the war were gone, replaced by a chaotic, nightmarish maze of shell holes, connected by muddy, collapsing tunnels. These craters, often filled with a foul mixture of rainwater, blood, and the liquefied remains of corpses, became the only shelter for the soldiers. The statistics are almost impossible to grasp. Over the course of the 300-day battle, more than 60 million artillery shells were fired by both sides. That is an average of 200,000 shells per day. Or, to put it another way, roughly 3 shells per square meter of the entire battlefield. but these were not evenly distributed. In some areas, the concentration was far higher. Craters were stacked on top of craters, each new explosion erasing the evidence of the previous one, creating a landscape that was constantly being reshaped, constantly being destroyed and recreated in an endless cycle of violence. The mud of Verdun was a living entity, a malevolent force that seemed to have a will of its own. It was a thick, clinging, glutinous substance, a mixture of clay, pulverized rock, and human remains. It swallowed men whole. A soldier who slipped off a duckboard could be sucked down into the mud, his comrades helpless to save him, his screams slowly muffled as the thick brown ooze closed over his head. It swallowed the wounded, who would lie in the bottom of a shell crater, slowly drowning in the filth. It swallowed the dead, preserving their bodies in a grotesque, half-decomposed state, only to be churned up again by the next artillery shell. The mud was not just an obstacle. It was a weapon, a killer as effective as any bullet or shell. Thirst was a constant torment. The shelling destroyed all the natural water sources, and the water that collected in the shell craters was a toxic soup, contaminated with the chemicals from exploded shells, with poison gas, and with the bacteria from thousands of rotting corpses. Men were driven mad by thirst, and would risk death to crawl to a shell hole and drink the foul, brown water, knowing that it would likely give them dysentery, a death sentence in itself. The taste of that water, metallic, bitter, and foul, was a taste that haunted survivors for the rest of their lives. And then there was the psychological toll. The constant, unending bombardment, the vibration of the earth that never stopped, the sight of death and dismemberment on a scale that was impossible to process. It drove men insane. Soldiers developed what became known as Verdun Syndrome, a form of shell shock so severe that it left them catatonic, trembling uncontrollably, or screaming in a state of perpetual terror. They were haunted by the smell of the unburied, a sweet, cloying stench that clung to everything, that you could taste in the back of your throat. They were haunted by the claustrophobia of the underground forts and tunnels, where thousands of men were packed together in the dark, listening to the shells exploding above them, waiting for the one that would bury them alive. The air in those tunnels was thick and fetid, a mixture of sweat, urine, feces, and the smell of fear. Men would sit in the dark, their hands shaking, their eyes wide and staring, unable to speak, unable to move, trapped in a waking nightmare from which there was no escape. The sensory experience of Verdun was a complete assault on every human faculty. The taste of cordite, the chemical explosive used in artillery shells, was a constant presence in the mouths of soldiers. It was a bitter, metallic taste that coated the tongue and burned the throat. The air itself was thick with it, a choking fog that made breathing difficult and painful. The vibration of the ground was not just something you felt, it was something that lived inside you, a constant tremor that shook your bones and rattled your teeth. Even when the shelling stopped, which it rarely did, the ground continued to vibrate, as if the earth itself had been traumatized, as if it could not stop shaking. Men reported that they could feel the vibrations in their sleep, that they would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced that another bombardment had begun, only to find that it was just the memory of the shaking, a phantom sensation that would not leave them. The noise was beyond description. It was not just loud, it was a physical force, a pressure that crushed the eardrums and made thought impossible. The constant roar of the artillery, the screaming of the shells as they arced through the air, the thunderous explosions as they impacted the ground, it created a wall of sound that was inescapable. Men went deaf. They lost the ability to hear normal conversation and communicated through hand signals and shouted commands. many would suffer from tinnitus, a constant ringing in the ears, for the rest of their lives. The noise of Verdun was a weapon in itself, a tool of psychological warfare that broke men's minds as surely as the shells broke their bodies. In the midst of this industrial slaughter, one of the most bizarre and tragic episodes of the war unfolded: the fall of Fort Douaumont. Douaumont was the cornerstone of the Verdun defenses, the largest and most powerful fortress in the world at the time. It was a massive concrete and steel behemoth, with walls 6 feet thick, armed with retractable gun turrets and a network of underground tunnels. The French believed it was impregnable. They believed it would take an army to capture it. They were wrong. On February 25th, just 4 days into the battle, Fort Douaumont fell. It was not captured by a massive assault. It was not captured by a heroic charge. It was captured by a single German sergeant, a man named Kunze, and a handful of his men from the 24th Brandenburg Regiment. They had been advancing through the shattered landscape and had simply walked up to the fort. Visibility was poor due to the smoke and dust from the bombardment. They found a way in through an unguarded window. The French, in a disastrous miscalculation, had stripped the fort of most of its garrison, believing that modern artillery had made such fortresses obsolete. There were only a few dozen French soldiers inside, mostly maintenance crew and gunners, who were completely unaware that the Germans were even there. Sergeant Kunze and his men wandered through the dark, empty tunnels, capturing the few French soldiers they encountered until they had taken control of the entire fortress. The strongest fort in the world had been captured by a handful of men who had simply walked in through a window. It was a tragic, almost comical irony, a symbol of the chaos and confusion of the battle. And it was a disaster for the French. The fall of Douaumont was a huge blow to French morale, and it would cost them hundreds of thousands of lives to retake it. But the story of Fort Douaumont does not end with its capture. The fort, now packed with German soldiers, became a death trap of a different kind. On May 8, 1916, a catastrophe occurred. In the crowded, dark tunnels of the fort, someone tried to heat up coffee using flamethrower fuel. A fire broke out, and in the confined space, it spread with terrifying speed. The flames reached a munitions depot, and the entire fort was rocked by a massive explosion. In the passageways packed with men, the situation was horrific. The blast wave tore through the tunnels, incinerating men instantly. Others were crushed by falling debris. Many were suffocated by the smoke and toxic fumes. In all, 679 German soldiers died in that single explosion, their bodies entombed in the very fortress they had captured. It was a grim reminder that at Verdun, death could come from any direction, at any time. With the Germans in control of the high ground at Douaumont, the French were in a desperate position. The only thing that kept the French army from collapsing was a single, narrow road, a 37-mile stretch of dirt and gravel that connected the railhead at Bar-le-Duc to the front lines at Verdun. This road became known as La Voie Sacrée, the Sacred Way. It was the artery that kept the heart of France beating. For 300 days, the Voie Sacrée was a scene of organized chaos, a constant, unending stream of trucks, thousands of them, ferried men, ammunition, and supplies to the front. At its peak, a vehicle passed a given point every 14 seconds. In moments of extreme crisis, that frequency increased to one vehicle every 5 seconds. 3,000 trucks a day, day and night, in all weather. The road was subjected to incredible wear and tear. Crews of workers, Many of them colonial laborers from French Africa and Indochina, worked around the clock to repair the road, filling in potholes, laying down gravel, and clearing away the wreckage of vehicles that had broken down or been destroyed by German shelling. The rule was simple and brutal. The line could not stop. If a truck broke down, it was not repaired. It was immediately pushed into the ditch, its cargo transferred to another vehicle, and the line moved on. The road was the lifeline of the French army, and it could not be allowed to fail. Over the course of the battle, the Voie Sacrée carried 500,000 tons of equipment and 400,000 men to the front. It was a logistical miracle, a testament to French determination and organizational skill. The battle for Verdun was not just a battle of men. It was a battle of logistics, a battle of wills, a battle of endurance. And the Voie Sacrée was the symbol of France's refusal to break, but the price of that refusal was the complete and utter annihilation of the landscape. 9 villages in the path of the battle were completely wiped off the map. Places like Fleury-devant Douaumont, Beaumont-en-Verdunois, Bezonvaux, Cumières-le-Mort-Homme, Douaumont, Haumont-près-Simonio, Louvemont-Côte-du-Poivre, Ornis, and Vaux-devant-Damloup. These were not just damaged, they were erased. Fleury, for example, changed hands 16 times during the battle. Each time it was captured, it was subjected to a fresh bombardment. By the end of the battle, there was nothing left. Not a single building stood, not a single wall remained. The village had been reduced to a field of shell craters, indistinguishable from the surrounding moonscape. Today, these are the phantom villages of Verdun. They were never rebuilt. The land was too poisoned, too contaminated with unexploded ordnance and the chemicals of war. They exist only as signs on empty, cratered fields of grass, signs that read, "Village died for France." They are a haunting reminder of the total, absolute destruction that was visited upon this small corner of the world. They are a reminder that war does not just kill people. It kills places. It kills history. It kills the very fabric of civilization. After 300 days of relentless, brutal fighting, the Battle of Verdun finally came to an end. The front line had moved only a few kilometers, and then had moved back again. The Germans had failed to bleed France white. Instead, both sides had been bled white. The total number of casualties, dead, wounded, and missing, was over 700,000. 300,000 men had been killed. For what? For a few square miles of shattered earth. For a fortress that had been captured by accident. For a cynical plan that had failed. The battle had achieved nothing. It had proven nothing. It had only demonstrated the capacity of modern industrial warfare to consume human life on an unimaginable scale. The ultimate symbol of the futility of Verdun is the Douaumont Ossuary. It is a massive, somber monument, a stone tower that rises above the battlefield. It was built after the war as a memorial to the dead and as a final resting place for those who could not be identified. And inside, through small windows in the walls, you can see them, the bones, the skeletal remains of 130,000 unidentified soldiers, French and German, who died at Verdun. Their bones are mixed together, a jumble of skulls, femurs, and ribs. Enemies in life, they are united in death. Their individual identities lost forever. Their only memorial, this anonymous, collective tomb. It is a powerful, haunting image. A reminder that in death, all men are equal, and that the divisions that drove them to kill each other are ultimately meaningless. Verdun was not a battle, it was a machine. A machine that consumed human beings, that turned them into mud and bone and dust. It was the logical conclusion of a war that had lost all meaning, a war where the only goal was to kill more of the enemy than he killed of you. It was a historical horror story, a warning from the past about the depths of human cruelty and the ultimate futility of war. The legacy of Verdun extends far beyond the battlefield. The land itself remains scarred. A century later, the forests that have grown back over the shell craters are filled with unexploded ordnance, millions of shells and grenades that still lie buried in the soil, waiting to be disturbed. The area is known as the Zone Rouge, the Red Zone, a vast expanse of land that is too contaminated, too dangerous, to be inhabited or farmed. The soil is poisoned with arsenic, lead, and other heavy metals from the shells. The water is contaminated. The very air, when the wind disturbs the soil, can carry particles of toxic chemicals. It is a dead zone, a monument to the destructive power of industrial warfare. And yet, life persists. The forests of Verdun have become a wildlife refuge, home to rare species of birds, bats, and plants that have found sanctuary in this poisoned landscape. Nature, it seems, is more resilient than we are. It has reclaimed the battlefield, covering the scars with a blanket of green, but the scars are still there, just beneath the surface. The craters remain, the bones remain, the memory remains. Verdun is a story that we must never forget. It is a story of courage, of endurance, of the incredible capacity of human beings to survive in the face of unimaginable horror. But it is also a story of folly, of the madness of war, of the terrible price that is paid when nations choose violence over diplomacy. It is a story that reminds us that war is not glorious, that it is not heroic, that it is simply a machine that grinds human beings into dust. And it is a story that we must tell, again and again, so that future generations will understand the true cost of war, and will choose a different path. The men who fought at Verdun, both French and German, were not heroes in the traditional sense. They were victims. Victims of a system that valued territory over human life, that saw men as expendable resources to be fed into the machine of war. They were ordinary men, farmers and factory workers, students and shopkeepers, who were thrust into an extraordinary hell. And they endured. They endured because they had no choice, because desertion meant execution, because surrender meant dishonor. They endured because their comrades endured, because to break would be to betray the men beside them. And in that endurance, in that refusal to give up even in the face of certain death, there is a kind of tragic nobility. But it is a nobility born of suffering, not of glory. And it is a nobility that should never have been asked of them. If this story of the hell of Verdun has moved you, help me to continue telling these vital, untold stories of the First World War. A like and a subscription make a huge difference in keeping this history alive for a new generation.